I'm usually fond of saying, on this channel and in real life, that culture matters more than rational arguments, and even considered discussion. As humans, we're experience-based creatures, and films, books, and TV shows, whatever else you might say about them, are experiences. Experiences that mold our opinions, baseline premises, and perceptions of the universe. Given that reality, it might be tempting to think of pop culture makers as the opinion makers of the world. They can put their biases directly into the art they create, and by the magic of mass media marketing, they will be the editors of public opinion in the future. But the relationship is even more complicated than that. Cultural works, which, on their surface, might appear to explicitly advocate for one position, might unintentionally illustrate quite a different one. Even artists may believe they have made a certain case, but by pure coincidence, an accident of their own upbringing, they may have in fact made an entirely different point, a stranger and more ancient point. I remember really first learning this lesson years ago. Then I was expounding the virtues of one of my favorite films, a film that I thought was delightfully impious and which fit right into my skeptical opinions at that time. However, a friend present, who I think may have been a Christian, hit me with a rather unorthodox observation, namely, that the film I was describing was, contrary to what I thought, in fact a religious parable. "Watch it again," he said. "You'll see what I'm saying." Of course, I thought this was hogwash, but sure enough, the next time I saw the film, I kept an open mind, and the interpretation became suddenly obvious. I could never look at the film the same way again, and the experience has been much on my mind since then. A movie that I had watched over 10 times had a deep meaning that I was totally unaware of, and because of that, the film's never left me. I know I've made a series of quite negative videos up until this point, but in this particular installment on the channel, I want to be positive. I'm hoping to walk through this movie in detail and explain what I saw there and why it's been much in my mind when I hear debates between atheists, Christians, and feminists, and see them fail to communicate points even when they're observing the very same thing. Now, of course, this might be a long road, but I hope that you'll bear with me because I think that there's a point here and it's important to understand. Oh, and in case the suspense is killing you over what the mystery film is...
Get down, get down.
You got a corpse in a car, minus a head in the garage. Take me to it.
It's Pulp Fiction. Where do we really begin with a movie like Pulp Fiction? The film has been so universally praised for its style, it's really hard to know what to make of it in terms of substance. In fact, many people use this as the quintessential example of how style is elevated above substance. Sure, the movie is well written, and oftentimes most people call it postmodern and bold with what it does with time and narrative, but is there ultimately any meaning to the whole endeavor? Most critics never really answer this question, although I would say there definitely is substance behind Pulp Fiction style, even if the director didn't intend it. Now here, of course, I have to blow the obligatory spoiler alert trumpet, because we will be getting into plot details. But to really find substance, we have to ask the question, what is Pulp Fiction? Well, fundamentally, Pulp Fiction is a composition of 4 short stories, each related to each other in terms of time and narrative, but not in a very typical way. Or should I say, not typical for a modern film. Because Pulp Fiction's use of multiple stories with similar characters told out of order was a very, very common way of relating stories in the Middle Ages. Larger medieval epics typically did not begin at the chronological beginning and usually changed their reference frame and time in order to show different characters and different plot lines. The purpose of this roundabout storytelling was to better illustrate some central theme or systematic moral that was partly expressed in each of the shorter stories. The broader narrative might begin with some framing mechanism, some question that needed to be answered, and as per typical form, each individual story would make a contribution, until finally, all the stories would come around full circle, and the narrative would return to the question with some central answer, usually terminating in the same place that it began. This, of course, is very much present in common medieval stories like the Decameron, the Canterbury Tales, and in even some tellings of things like King Arthur. For instance, in the quintessential example of the Canterbury Tales, the story focuses around a set of pilgrims, all seeking holiness by visiting the shrine of Thomas à Becket in Canterbury. At an inn, they begin telling stories, and through their diverse tales, they illustrate concepts of Christian ethics, and in particular, the 7 deadly sins, the chief thing holding them back from the holiness they seek to find at Canterbury. Thus, the initial question framed at the outset is answered, but only by a series of stories that illustrate the details. But does Pulp Fiction have a similar form? Well, in fact, it does. The storyline is broken up into 4 distinct parts: the diner, Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife, the gold watch, and the body situation. Moreover, each of these 4 chapters are spaced out in a way such that the film begins and ends in the same place. It forms a cycle. We might then go on to ask ourselves, is there any theme, is there any central question that Pulp Fiction is trying to answer? And for this, like other medieval epics, we might start by looking at the beginning. Pulp Fiction, in fact, has a very famous prologue. In it, 2 small-time crooks, presumably married, sit at a cafe discussing the dangers of their profession, when suddenly the husband seizes on an idea that it would not, in fact, be too hard to rob the cafe they are currently patronizing. After some discussion, the couple decides to go through with their plan. A very, very disconcerting piece of dialogue follows.
I love you, honey bunny.
Everybody be cool, this is a robbery!
Any of you fucking pricks move! And I'll execute every motherfucking last one of you!
Thus, the theme of Pulp Fiction in this way is framed. The question we're asking is how mankind has such a contradictory dual nature, on the one hand loving, and on the other incredibly violent. And of course, Quentin Tarantino has a very pessimistic answer. The question of man's dual nature between love and hate is thrown into sharper relief in the scene that follows after the credit roll. In the next scene, 2 well-dressed men, Vincent and Jules, are driving and discussing a variety of things, including hamburgers, trips to Europe, television, and sex. The tone of the conversation is casual. It focuses on consumerism, even when Vincent brings up a rather serious topic of his new job to take his boss's wife, Mia, out for dinner the following night. Of course, all of this changes as the 2 men reach their destination, and we understand that they are in fact hitmen. What follows is one of the most psychotic scenes in cinema history. Jules, previously the more rational of the 2 men, flips out in a psychotic rage, robbing his victims of their food, aggressively terrifying them, and conducting an extended game of rhetorical cat and mouse before deciding to finish them off. To top it all off, Jules recites a Bible verse, one that has since become infamous.
Ezekiel 25:17. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the iniquities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
So what are we to make of this? Again, this is an inversion and an answer to the original question brought up in the prelude: how to reconcile man's dual nature for love and hate. But this first installment has a very pessimistic view. It is in fact the picture of human nature that modernity commends to us. The picture shows a casual humanity comfortable in their appetites for sex, drugs, and vacations, rationally discussing the ins and outs of their preferences. However, when confronted with a real life and death scenario, they reveal that all of these casual rationalizations are a facade, and their true nature is brutal, cruel, and pointless. Every element that was rationally discussed as a consumer item in the first part of the segment, be it food, sex, or entertainment, is then used as a mechanism to torture Jules' victim in the second. Even religion in the Bible is turned towards the end of sadism. At this point, love seems like a false part of humanity and hatred the real portion. It seems as if our desire for consumeristic products, our appetites, are merely a facade put over our more brutal nature, our desire to hurt each other. Once removed, we are at our core evil and hateful beings. Of course, this is not a new question and not even a new answer. The question of the dual nature of man has been of interest to philosophers for thousands of years, and in particular Christian philosophers. Why do people commit hateful acts, given that everyone desires good things? I think two of the most prominent philosophers to really have answered this question satisfactorily are St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. Both philosophers postulated that hatred and evil were not intrinsic parts of human nature. Rather, evil derives from prioritization, when humans place lower goods above higher ones. We all desire good, but sometimes we make the mistake of prioritizing that which is lesser over that which is greater. As a result, we have evil and hatred. This perspective was further complemented by modern Christian philosopher C.S. Lewis, who extracted Aristotle and Aquinas' hierarchy of human natures from appetite to spirituality, and described in fact 4 loves that characterized humans' desires and humans' love for each other. Starting at the bottom, there was eros, or merely romantic and sexual love; philia, the rational friendship love; storge, the affectionate, loyalistic, and familial love; and finally, agape, the divine and unconditional love. Again, pointing to the fact that hatred and evil was due to a misprioritization of the lower love over the higher ones. So what is the relationship between this and Pulp Fiction? Well, I would argue, in fact, that past this point, Pulp Fiction uses just this mechanism to demonstrate the true nature of human love and hatred. Each of the subsequent chapters demonstrates a journey from a depraved state that we see in the initial prologue to an elevated one, and at each step we see a different one of the 4 loves involved. Spiritual progress is made, but we have to start at the beginning. The beginning is sensuality and appetite, and the love embodied is eros. This starts the first official chapter of Pulp Fiction, Vincent Vega and Marcellus Wallace's wife. True to form, the chapter opens up on a scene of pure sensuality and appetite. Vincent Vega, waiting for his drug dealer, overhears the conversation about erotic piercing from the drug dealer's wife and friend. The sequence is meant to juxtapose drug use with sexual sensuality, a theme that we'll see throughout this chapter. And it is further augmented by the sequence where Vincent shoots up and drives to his destination. This is a person that is dominated by appetite and sensuality and has no escape from it. The plot of this initial chapter is truly a bizarre one. In it, Vince is tasked with taking Mia Wallace, his boss, Marcellus Wallace's wife, on a date. Of course, we've already established that Marcellus Wallace is a jealous, overprotective psychopath, so why is he courting danger by having one of his retainers look out for his wife for a night? Can't she be trusted on her own for a little while? This altogether seems old-fashioned, but it is, in fact, one of the main tropes of medieval romantic literature. Medieval chivalric romances had as a central theme chastity and loyalty, and one of the main challenges was a hero put in charge to rescue or escort his lord's bride. In the romance, he must overcome his sensual and erotic love for her and transition it into a more pious, chivalric, and chaste love. Some notable examples in this genre are Tristan and Isolde, and also the tales from the Arthurian cycle, either of Lancelot and Guinevere or of Galahad. In these tales, sexual danger plays a large role, and the main question is whether the hero and heroine are consumed by it, or whether they can overcome it and transcend their own desires to a higher state. Of course, this was famously failed by Lancelot and famously succeeded at by Galahad. What the audience must ask themselves now is whether Vincent will be a triumphant example of this, or a tragic one. The early signs in this scene do not bode well. We meet our heroine Mia Wallace in her home, doing cocaine and playing Dusty Springfield songs. The ambience of the scene suggests yet another character totally at the whims of their own appetites and desires. It seems impossible that either of them will resist a sexual temptation if one exists. The next scene only complements this sexual tension. Vincent and Mia go to Jackrabbit Slim's, a 1950s diner that evokes all the innocence and sensuality of 1950s America. The two engage in casual small talk and even win a dance competition to the song A Teenage Wedding. All the while, the subtext building is the chemistry going on between them, the sexuality that exists behind the veneer of an innocent 1950s culture of gossip and fast food. Indeed, there is sexual tension between the hero and heroine in this scene, and it is all the more dangerous because these are two people who have no way to relate to the world other than sensually. They consider love purely a product of appetite, and because of that, it is impossible for the viewer to think that this relationship will not be consumed sexually, even if it means dire consequences for both of the parties involved. The dialogue seems to build up to one scene in particular, which comes at the middle of Vincent and Mia's engagement, and underlines the problem of their relationship.
Why do we feel it's necessary to yak about bullshit in order to be comfortable?
I don't know. That's a good question.
That's when you know you found somebody really special. And you can just shut the fuck up for a minute and comfortably share silence.
The chapter cuts to hours later when Vincent and Mia return from their date, having won the dance competition. Mia turns on the radio with a slightly suggestive song on the air, and it seems that Vincent is seconds away from falling into the great temptation that entrapped Lancelot and so many other loyal knights before him. But then an inversion of expectations occurs. The trap of lust is short-circuited by Mia's own appetite for drugs. She overdoses, and the nightmare that could have befallen Vincent suddenly becomes a much more accelerated version of the same nightmare. The division between sensuality and the consequences of that sensuality has been broken. The scene then shifts back to the home of Vincent's drug dealer, where the chapter began, as Vincent pulls up and desperately tries to find a way to save Mia's life. Everything suddenly flies into sharp contrast. Vincent crashes the car he was complaining about being keyed in the intro to the chapter. The cool expertise of the drug dealer is replaced by a strange incompetence and hysteria, and the sensuality and eroticism of his wife is replaced by her bickering and yelling at him as he fumbles to find the intercardio injection. All the while, Vincent's attempts to revive Mia seem to strangely satirize the sensuality the audience was expecting from the first part of the chapter. Vincent talks to Mia in a loving way, trying to revive her. He tears off her blouse, revealing her breasts to give her an injection, and places a dot right upon her heart. This all culminates as Vincent raises his hand to strike Mia through the heart. The image could not be more clear. This is the coup de grace, the strike of mercy, Cupid's arrow that pierces the heart. We are reminded of Lucretia stabbing herself in the heart, and of Juliet's suicide. The heart has been poisoned with lust, and it's only the destruction of the heart that will kill sensuality and allow life and rationality to be restored. And like that, the spell is broken. After the incident, Vincent drives the revived Mia home, and the two share silence. They have now broken through their appetite-based sensual natures into the rational. They have a friendship that's unclouded by lust. They share a poignant goodbye as Mia tells the corny joke she was too embarrassed to tell Vincent earlier. And the audience understands that in fact a deep platonic friendship has remained, even if Vincent might maintain some chivalric erotic affection from Mia. Sanity has prevailed in this chapter. In short, this chapter has communicated a very tight, classic parable of romantic love, accelerated by the proxy of drugs for lust. Two characters, at first enslaved by their lustful appetites, experience the consequences, die to those consequences, and emerge on the other side with a deeper and more mature love. We have in fact shown a transition from a lower love, eros, to a higher one, philia. Rationality and rational friendship must rule over the appetites. Only in this regard can something real and lasting be formed, and not some kitschy, ephemeral nostalgia or high. We immediately understand at this point that the earlier nihilism embodied in the preludes is not absolute. In a meaningless world, sensuality and friendship would be more interchangeable. But in this chapter, the characters have learned something. Something has been gained. They have moved to a higher state, and good has triumphed. But is rationality and rational friendship the highest good that humans can obtain? This certainly isn't the understanding of our popular conceptions of love. Love is blind, love is irrational. When people say this, are they referring only to the lower sensuality of eros, overcome, as we saw in the first chapter, by platonic and rational friendship? Is there a higher form of love that is in some way unrational or super-rational? The next chapter answers this, with an opening story that is very bizarre.
I hid this uncomfortable hunk of metal up my ass 2 years. Then... now. Oh man, I gave the watch to you.
In the opening scene of The Gold Watch, a returning military commander visits a young Butch and bestows on him a watch. A watch that was in fact an heirloom of his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, and had been brought through each of the many great wars of the early 20th century. The story is made additionally weird by the way that the commander and his father were able to smuggle the watch through being imprisoned at a POW camp, apparently by hiding it up an anal cavity, which may have in fact led to Butch's father's death. It's difficult to know how to process this, because the story is told sincerely, but at the same time is so utterly irrational. It's impossible to imagine two grown men going through such indignities and actually risking and perhaps losing their life for a mere piece of sentimentality, something that really should have no meaning in any kind of rational evaluation. What rational individual would die for a watch, which really only could have sentimental value? The rest of the chapter, The Gold Watch, takes place on the eve of an insidious double cross, where an older Butch wins a boxing match he was paid to lose, killing the other boxer in the process. The mob boss Marcellus, who put the fix in, is ready to track him to the ends of the earth and murder him. a feud that is to be expected. This is a disagreement that we have every reason to expect, a hatred that is entirely irrational. And we've established that both men have very little sympathy or empathy for anyone who's not themselves. The first part of the gold watch follows a very logical pattern, as Butch escapes the boxing ring, evades the gangsters pursuing him, secures the bets that he placed on himself, and makes it home to his girlfriend, both of whom are waiting to flee the following day. It looks like everything is going to plan. That is, until Butch discovers that his girlfriend forgot to take a gold watch. It is still at home, where gangsters are almost certainly waiting to kill him. The rational thing to do, of course, would be to leave without it, but Butch, like his father and grandfather before him, has more than rationality to contend with, and he decides that he must risk his life to retrieve the watch that was his heirloom. However, a stroke of luck occurs, and Butch is able to infiltrate his own house, retrieve the watch, and even kill the assailant sent to murder him, Vincent. The plan is almost complete and Butch is almost home when another stroke of misfortune occurs and he encounters the last person he wanted to see, Marcellus Wallace. The next scene that results is one of pure insanity, as the two men pursue each other across the streets of LA, both struggling with injuries that they have inflicted upon each other. Butch wanders into a pawn shop and Marcellus follows, and a fight ensues. Little do they realize that this pawn shop is but the maw of hell, and soon the two are prisoners at the whims of two sexual fetishists who prey on passers-by. By pure chance, the assailants decide to torture Marcellus Wallace first, and by another stroke of pure chance, Butch is able to escape his bonds and make his way out of the pawn shop, leaving Marcellus to rot at the hands of his rapists. However, before he actually does leave, another irrational thought occurs to him, and he commits to, in fact, saving Marcellus, his sworn enemy. Of course, this makes no sense. Marcellus has sworn to destroy him, and there's no reason to believe that the gangster will reconsider this and take mercy upon him. But despite the fact that Butch knows that, he commits to actually rescuing Marcellus, and after cutting his way through one of the rapists, the audience is almost not surprised to hear a liberated Marcellus Wallace saying the following.
Step aside, Butch.
The men have come to some understanding. It is not friendship, it is not even rational, and it makes no external sense. But at the same time, it is extremely human. They have survived together in a battle against a larger foe, and because of that, they have a bond of brotherhood. More than affection, more than rationality. It is almost familial. It is the same irrational loyalty and brotherhood that led Butch's father to carry the gold watch through the war, even if it meant his own death. It is the same irrational affection that we see in many tropes repeated throughout human history, starting with one of the oldest traditions of them all, the story of Gilgamesh. We understand from these stories that battle and blood bond men stronger than any rationality ever could. Blood is thicker than water, and our family members, our comrades, those who we co-occupy foxholes with, have bonds that do not need to be rationally justified. Even if we do not like these people, the reality of our humanness and the fact that we have survived with them and are in some ways related by blood makes the attachment that much stronger. This is what causes men to die charging machine gun encampments, and what causes women to risk their lives to rescue their infant children. This is a love that goes beyond rationality, and it is not a lower love, but something that's higher, something that can transcend what we feel emotionally or even rationally, and yet make us more human and more elevated. We have come to yet another level of humanity. As we round out the last full chapter of Pulp Fiction, the viewer might wonder if there is going to be a culmination of the question, an exploration of the highest love humans can express and appreciate. Like the previous chapters, we might expect that some hint about the general theme will be offered in the introduction to the chapter. Just as the first chapter began by a discussion of sex, and the second one began with the recountation of a war story, this chapter begins with a prayer.
You read the Bible, Brett. Yes! Oh, there's this.
We have in fact narratively returned to the beginning, back to the end of the prelude. The scene begins with one of Brad's accomplices listening on to the scene that we previously witnessed at the beginning of the film. He waits holding a Magnum handgun while listening to Jules recite Ezekiel 25:17, all the while praying to God that he'll be able to survive the day. Seconds later, he musters the courage, bursts through the bathroom door, and unloads his Magnum at point-blank range. Hitting nothing, he is immediately killed by the return volley. We are left with Jules and Vincent, speechless. However, Jules sees something different. He is convinced that their survival was a miracle, and that God, in some way, stopped the bullets and saved them from certain death. Vincent, however, is more skeptical, and the remainder of the episode is the continuation of this debate, persisting even after Vincent accidentally murders his fellow accomplice, and the two have to pursue a Byzantine and desperate route of disposing of the body. Again, the question is definitively religious because every one of the arguments between Vincent and Jules in this episode is structured around a religious question, be it cleanliness, forgiveness, or even the consumption of pork products. Ultimately, though, the debate revolves around whether Vincent and Jules experienced a miracle in their salvation from the gunmen. This mirrors the pattern of all theological debates. Two people have seen the same things and have witnessed the same events, but somehow they cannot agree on what it all means. At this point, the two small-time criminals seen in the beginning set their plan into action and hijack the cafe. Jules, at first, is at their mercy, but the scene slowly evolves into Jules turning the tables and finally pulling the gun on Ringo. The two are obviously incompetent facing down the professional assassin, and it becomes obvious that the only reason that they are even alive is that Jules is allowing it. What follows is like a scene from the New Testament. Jules, instead of killing the small-time criminals, gives them all his money and lets them go, with the condition that they do not take the suitcase, which belongs to his boss. Indeed, the story has come full circle, moving from human loyalty to the divine love of agape, the final destination for human desires, the unconditional love that comes from direct experience with divinity. If we think about Jules' actions, they are based in really nothing human. He has no intimate bond with these people. They threatened his life directly, and he has every right to kill them, even legally perhaps. Yet, instead of firing back or defending himself, he gives them exactly what they asked for and lets them go. This is an act of pure charity and difficult to understand. Or difficult to understand without understanding spirituality. In some ways, the story resembles classic Christian saint narratives, in particular Saint Moses the Black of Egypt. Saint Moses himself was a brutal thug who murdered people, but upon coming to a monastery to rob it, he was seized by a spiritual experience and decided to commit himself instead to a mode of poverty and pacifism. Eventually, Saint Moses was martyred by other burglars who came to rob the monastery much later in life, and he is remembered for his selflessness and piety. We are dealing with a love here in both the historical Moses of Egypt and in Jules that takes no account of personal well-being or even rationality. It simply gives. It has come in contact with the true source of love and is therefore utterly able to sacrifice itself because it sees the humanity and human worth even in the people that have come to destroy the subject. It requires nothing and is totally unconditional. But how are we even to understand a love like this, a love that is so otherworldly? Some hint of this can be found in the movie's final soliloquy delivered by Jules, reciting the same Bible verse he recited when killing Brad earlier in the story.
The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children.
This is Ezekiel 25:17, but here we hear an entirely different interpretation. At first, there's the vengeful interpretation.
See, now I'm thinking, maybe it means you're the evil man, and I'm the righteous man. And Mr. 9mm here, he's the shepherd protecting my righteous ass in the valley of darkness.
Then, Jules recounts the heroic one.
Or it could mean, you're the righteous man, and I'm the shepherd. And it's the world that's evil and selfish. Now, I'd like that. But that shit ain't the truth.
Indeed, there's only one true interpretation of this passage that can recount why Jules is sparing the couple and not killing them for threatening his life.
The truth is, you're the weak, and I'm the tyranny of evil men. But I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd.
This is the repentant interpretation, and it is the truth. It is the nature of the passage. The life that Jules has led and continues to lead is evil. He preys upon the weak, and it will be a long road to redemption. But this act of mercy is the first step. This is the culmination of Pulp Fiction. We have completed the epic cycle of stories and returned to the point of origin. We see that love is stronger than evil because love is real. Love is what remains at the core of humanity when everything is stripped away. The hatred and cruelty, the callousness that we have seen throughout the movie is just an illusion. It is an act of sin and foolishness that only arises when lesser things are chosen over the greater one, and the greatest one is God. When sensuality is elevated over friendship, when rational plans are elevated over our common humanity, and when the pursuit of money is elevated over God himself, we act in hateful ways. But all this can be overcome by our own repentance, our own contact with the divine itself. In a way, all of Pulp Fiction, the previous 3 stories, can be folded into the moment between when Jules executes Brad and the moment when he experiences God's touch when the bullets avoid him seconds later. In that moment, he moved away from brutality and into charity. The audience does not experience the religious transformation and cannot immediately understand it. Without the subsequent stories illustrating how humanity can be elevated from brutality into things higher, this transformation of Jules would be very, very difficult to accept, and we would be left, like Vincent, questioning if any of this is actually real or simply affectation. However, because we are able to experience the stories earlier, spaced out in between these moments, we are able to understand Jules' transformation more adequately. We are able to sympathize with him when he spares Ringo's life at the end of the movie, and subsequently we can understand that there is more to this spiritual experience than just superstition and softness of thought. If there's a central theme to Pulp Fiction in my mind, it is the central role of interpretation and how many different people can see the same events and come away with entirely different concepts of the truth. This is really illustrated in the passage that Jules recites at the beginning of Pulp Fiction and then at the end. Just as an atheist might read the passage and see only the power-hungry rants of Bronze Age Jewish tribes, this might be entirely apart from what the author originally intended and what a devout reader might take from reading the passage. Similarly, we can interpret the world we occupy very differently. At first glance, we might see nothing but cold callousness and evil, a world full of cruelty, similar to the plotline of Pulp Fiction. But at the core, there are roots of humanity that are the true meaning and the true essence of what we are seeing. Only through reinterpretation can we ever see this underlying goodness. So is this what Quentin Tarantino intended? Perhaps not. Tarantino is certainly not the most spiritually aware person. However, what he is a prolific borrower from the past. Because everything is a reference to a pre-existing story, and narrative is fundamentally allegorical, despite Tarantino's own blindness, he cannot help but being wise, because the sources he borrows from contain wisdom that is timeless. Despite his best attempt to make a nihilistic masterpiece, he's instead written a moralistic hagiography. Of course, from the perspective of a religious viewer, this is nothing new. The will of the divine works through the unwilling, even the unwilling director. In the end, we are left with a beautiful tale of heroism, worthy of the ancient masters, and set to that most infamous rift of modernized medievalism, the Misirlou.